I never want to speak on narcissism in just blaming one type of person. Narcissism starts with a structure first before the individuals. And if we speak on narcissistic structure more, we can understand why us as individual has become more and more narcissistic in our tendencies and unable to tolerate each other and unable to tolerate rejection as much as other people who were grown up in a healthier environment where they didn't have to rely on their parents heavy for financial needs and didn't have to rely on other people for status. Welcome back to my channel, everyone. My name is Peace. If you're new here, welcome, welcome. Today, I want to go over the conversation of why immigrants are so prone to narcissistic system and why they're so vulnerable to narcissistic system as a whole. All right. If you're interested, stick tuned. So, what is considered a narcissistic system? We hear a lot about traits about narcissistic individuals, narcissistic parents, but what's narcissistic system? One narcissistic system is any system that's led by authoritarianism and that does not value individuality, that's very emphasis on external validation. And I'll go into other details on different characteristics of narcissistic system, but that's like the grand definition of a narcissistic system, right? So, what type of system tends to be more narcissistic? Well, our family structure tends to be narcissistic depending on the parenting style. We have political structure that could be narcissistic. We have our school structure that could be narcissistic. We have work, we have religion, and we have social organizations such as sport, even social clubs, social beating groups. Those can all be narcissistic if it's based on authoritative way of grouping versus a more collective approach. And also, even collectivist culture can be narcissistic if it's authoritative, in which everybody is supposed to put together, but only the top are actually being able to make decisions. Okay. So, why are immigrants so prone to narcissistic system, specifically when they move to the US? Well, again, let me talk about the different characteristics of narcissistic system because this would draw a better picture for us, right? First off, a very, very common characteristics of a narcissistic system is that it strongly emphasizes authoritarianism. Again, more of a bureaucracy. The top make the decisions while the bottom execute the task, but the top makes the decision, right? Think about a workplace or a family system where parents are giving order and kids are following it, and there's not a direct feedback in between that's collaborative. Another characteristic of a narcissistic system is the value groupthink over individuality. The value the overall tradition of the group that has been custom since day one over new individual approach to running the group. Another Another attribute of a narcissistic system is they have an inflated sense of exclusivity, right? So think in an immigrant family that's tribalist, that came from a specific tribe, that's an exclusive way of doing things. Instead of being able to welcome new members in, you have to be part of this exclusive club. Sports teams are very exclusive in that way. Some religious group have very exclusive steps in which you can join and be part of their religious group. Even then, some of them you have to be born into it or you cannot join it at all. Certain political organizations are extremely exclusive. It's all about who know who, and it's inflated. It's not necessarily based on like organic understanding of the community they're in. It's more of an exclusivity to make sure certain people who don't seem like they fit, they're left out. They should be on the outside. There's a huge sense of in and out group, narcissistic structure. Another one is they have high sensitivity to criticism. Our narcissistic structure does not like feedback from those who are on the bottom to the top. Those who are on the top again give order because it is authoritative, and then those who are on the bottom usually typically go out and do the task, but they don't give order and they don't give criticism to the order being given. That tends to be a narcissistic system. If you cannot criticize your boss in their approach to supervision, if you cannot criticize your parent in their approach to parenting, but they can criticize you, that calls for narcissistic abuse easily because you have to hold your tongue. Another another attribute of a narcissistic system, there's a lot of unspoken rules in the system, right? In certain family structure, you should just know there's no rules that are explicitly set out loud, but it's more unspoken that you should just be able to follow those codes of conduct. I know even in my tribe, that's very common in my community. Certain things are not said, but there's this unspoken rule. I'll give you an example. If you invite a Liberian out to dinner or to eat, there's a notion that you're paying for it. That's not something we say out loud, but in our culture, you don't invite someone out to eat without you having an income to pay for it because it's very collectivist. So that's an example of an unspoken rule for Liberians in how we treat each other. Another one is they have a very raw, delusional way of thinking. Now, this could be a little bit more overt or covert. There's a sense of, again, this very high superiority. There's a sense that you're either born with it or you're not, and it is all very delusional because people who are individuals can actually fit into the groups if the structure wasn't so rigid. Another one is there's a fear of being too independent when you're in a narcissistic structure. For specifically for certain workplaces, having individuals who like to go off on their own and do things, who like to go off and get tasks done and then manage their time better, they might be frowned upon because they're not moving like the entire group. I know I struggle with this living in North Dakota because people tend to think the same, and I do not at all. So, and I did not come from an authoritative parent, so I like to be very individualistic in how I move in life. So I've struggled with that one. And finally, narcissistic systems tend to attract deeply insecure people. Okay. And I don't want us to see the term insecure as in like what we see in pop culture, like, oh, they're insecure, they don't believe in their self-worth, that's why they're in this group. None of that. That's part of it, but the main source of insecurity tends to come from a scarcity mindset, tends to come from being on survival mode. Other one, they have poor self-regulation. A lot of immigrants, we came from war, so we haven't gotten to that Maslow hierarchy of needs where we're self-actualizing. We're more on the bottom trying to get our basic needs like food, shelter, um, clothing, because we're on the bottom of the needs and not necessarily the top of Maslow hierarchy need. We haven't gotten to self-actualize and regulate ourselves yet. So again, we're prone to being in narcissistic structure because narcissistic structures require individuals who are not independent. It requires individuals who don't think the same, who don't think for themselves, but they just think for the whole group. Narcissistic structure actually love quiet individuals who are just able to go along with the rules that's set up. They follow the rules without necessarily questioning it too much because again, is a metric based system where if you do what is told, you get a reward for it. And immigrants are very prone to this. Okay, now that I've broken down different characteristics of narcissistic structure, I just want to talk again more in details in why us immigrants tend to be very, very vulnerable to this. First off, as I mentioned in other videos, immigrants, most of us are coming in due to forced migration. There's very few immigrants in the US that are African, even from Canada, even in Europe, most of us are coming in due to some sort of forced migration. And that can even include financial insecurity. You might not have a war in your country, but if your country lack resources to have proper job, you might want to come to the US because it's considered land of opportunity. And because you're being forced from living in your community, you're going to be prone to being in narcissistic system in the US, right? You might take a lower paying job that doesn't respect your individuality as an immigrant. And you might just, we call it swallow your tongue. Just be quiet so you can get paid. That's number one reason why we tend to be prone to narcissistic system. Secondly, these immigrants who are coming in, our family tend to be based off shame-based parenting and fear-based parenting, right? My culture is very heavy on shame-based parenting. I will tell you, I had a video I uploaded very early on when I started YouTube. It was the one on cognitive distortion, and my camera went off early. And one of my nephews was telling me they watch all of my video and they're so proud of me. But the last video they saw it, the other nephew told them, Auntie P should be so ashamed of herself. She should have actually did it right. Why would she post that online knowing her camera turned off? You know, even though he's so very young, he understands like there's there's a level of perfectionism that's supposed to be put out as an immigrant, as an African. And if it's not up to par, you shouldn't put it out at all. So that's an example of someone being young and still understanding like you should be ashamed of yourself if something isn't perfect. A lot of immigrants were raised under that microscope. We're not just individuals for ourselves. We represent our parents, our grandparents, we represent our tribe, we represent our last name. There's so much weight to being part of an immigrant household that shame-based parenting is just very, very common. Very common. And that someone who's raised under shame-based parenting is very prone to being tolerate a narcissistic system or narcissistic abuse more than someone who was raised to be their own self and are able to make mistakes and not have such rigid rules for how you're supposed to live. All right. Another one is narcissistic system in school. Immigrants, because school is not free where most of us are from. I want to just focus mostly on Africa and Latin America. School's not free, right? So we're more prone to handling narcissistic abuse in school than others who grew up here and know school's free. So it's supposed to be supportive of individuality. As immigrants, we're not taught at home to speak up for ourselves when that teacher is wrong or to advocate for ourselves because our parents are just really, really scared also of challenging the system and not being a model minority. So then we're more prone to being in narcissistic system, even going to college when the system doesn't fit our needs, we're just supposed to tolerate it. You know, I grew up in North Dakota here again. There's a lot of few of us who are in the college system. I went to NDSU a little bit and it was completely unbearable attending school because the way they handle and speak about Black people and speak about immigration issues, you could tell there was no respect. There's no humility in how they seen us. Being the only immigrant in the class, I really saw for myself how much the system was abusive to us. They want us there to check off that diversity box, but they don't necessarily value our opinions in what we're bringing to the table. It's just there so they can meet a quota and get more state grant. And we're extremely prone to that. We have a lot of Nigerians who come in on a student visa and they struggle a lot with the school systems. I've seen it for myself because they have to make sure they get a visa for a job. They have to tolerate the school. If the school doesn't value them, isn't advocating for them, they just have to stick with it. That's why a lot of schools go out of the way to go and grab Nigerians, Ghanaians, and have them come in and be international students because they're more prone to sticking out the abuse than other immigrants because they don't have family support here. Another way in which us immigrants are very prone to narcissistic system is religion. We're very religious. Common to unpopular belief, a lot of Africans, we don't necessarily support or follow witchcraft. We are actually most majority Christian or Islam. We follow our Abrahamic God, right? And because of that, we have a lot of missionaries coming in to teach us their way of their God. And we could be very, very prone to being in a religious abusive system than actually creating our own religious system that support our values while also centering our Abrahamic God. You know, again, this Sunday I went to church, and this church that my family been attending for a while, the pastor, he tends to be very direct, speak strictly from the text. So I support it, right? But this Sunday, something clicked in him where he brought up it was about 2 minutes before the service ended. And this pastor had what I consider the audacity to tell us, even though there's a lot of Africans and immigrants in the church, none of them are actually working in the church. We're all paying offerings, but you don't see any of us as staff in the church. So that was one red flag I noticed. But then he started to talk about the war that's going on in the Middle East, and you could tell that his views are very bigoted. He made a statement that because we're all followers of Christ, we have to support Israel's has been attacked for a while. We have to support them. These people are, they're unaliving Israel's. And for someone who understands the political system, how it works, for me, I took offense to it because in our religious, when we come to church to talk about God and our spirituality, and God practices equality, right? So as a pastor, you assume he will be preaching that genocide is wrong. He will be preaching that on both ends, we need to pray for people, we need to pray for the war that's going on. But instead, he's still 10 toes on the notion that we're supposed to be only supporting one side of this political war that's going on, and that this war is an attack on a specific group of people because of a specific history. And I find that very off-putting. But that's an example of why we're prone to narcissistic systems, even in church, even in religion. Certain pastors will play in our face because we tend to follow the rules and not necessarily question it because of the model minority syndrome, right? But me and my siblings, we were not raised by narcissistic. Our mother had her own narcissistic tendencies, but it's not authoritarian. It's more vulnerable. She was more vulnerable to it, right? Very laissez-faire in her approach. She's very collaborative. So me and my siblings who were there was like, yeah, we're not coming to this church anymore. And our mom totally agreed with us, and now we're gonna find a new church. For a lot of families, it's not that easy where you can just tell your parents, yeah, this church you chose, what they're saying does not support us as a family, and just have a parent say, you know what, let's go to a new church. Let us all figure it out together. But my mom is one of those parents who really, she's open to taking our feedback. So now we're gonna go find a new church. But again, for a lot of immigrants, they don't have that. So they're very prone to being in a narcissistic structure that don't work for them because that's just family history and family tradition, and you go by that. All right. What's another one I want to cover just a little bit? Politics. You know, when Trump was running, a lot of immigrants wanted to vote for him. Why? Because there was this notion that he would benefit us. Even though his policies might not benefit a lot of other immigrants or other minority groups, other LGBTQ, a lot of immigrants will support certain politicians again because they want to be pushed a little bit further than where they're from. We tend to come from a bottom with very little resources. So any politicians that look our way, we're just happy to get some type of acknowledgement, right? And we could be used as political pawns if we're not aware of what rhetoric they're using to grab our attentions. So I hope this makes sense why us immigrants tend to be more prone to narcissistic system. It starts at home. Character begins at home. If you have a parent who is authoritative, who follows strict regime on who you should be as a child, you're going to be more prone to tolerating narcissistic abuse longer than those who grew up in being able to think for themselves. Okay, if we're vulnerable financially, you're going to be more prone to a narcissistic system, which immigrants are. If you lack status, a lot of immigrants might not have their documents in order, so they tend to be in abusive narcissistic relationships just so they can get their paper. It's so common for international students who are out here trying to make way for themselves and take care of their family back home to actually be worse off because they attract individuals who, again, who need that external validation, who wants you to think like them, and they have to stick with it until they get their documents. That's why there's a lot of memes that go on about immigrants get marrying for paper because they're vulnerable. They have a vulnerable status. Therefore, they're gonna attract individuals who needs, more emotional regulation and can do it on their own, and they're gonna attract people who wants to take advantage of them. All right. I hope that makes sense. I didn't want to use too much data on this one. It was just a raw conversation with you guys on why us immigrants tend to be prone to narcissistic system and narcissistic abuse as a whole. And we have to understand individuals who are in that environment, they tend to be narcissists themselves, right? That's why you see a lot of kids cutting their parents off, because if you grow up in that structure for long enough, you yourself will be a narcissist and have certain narcissistic tendencies like inability to self-regulate because your parents didn't regulate. You had to regulate them. So by the time you're older, you're not going to know how to regulate, and thus having stronger narcissistic tendencies, and the cycle goes on and on and on and on. I never want to speak on narcissism in just blaming one type of person. Narcissism starts with a structure first before the individuals. And if we speak on narcissistic structure more, we can understand why us as individuals has become more and more narcissistic in our tendencies and unable to tolerate each other and unable to tolerate rejection as much as other people who were grown up in a healthier environment where they didn't have to rely on their parents heavy for financial needs and didn't have to rely on other people for status. Y'all, that's all I got for today. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you. If you can just give me a like, share, or even comment on it, that would really help me a lot. I'm enjoying what I'm doing here, so that would be very beneficial to me. Anything else? Y'all have a wonderful, wonderful day. Stay prayed up. Peace out.